I'm Danielle, and welcome to This Enchanted House. Today, for our Exploring Aesthetic, we are going to look at academia. So academia is an aesthetic that deals with basically what we consider the world of academia, the world of school and learning and study, books, the humanities. And this is an aesthetic that's kind of grown up around it. So academia as an aesthetic kind of comes up about the same time, a little bit after cottagecore. So tracing with the rise of academia as an aesthetic is a little bit harder because unlike cottagecore, which was sort of this unique word that was used to describe this aesthetic, academia is a word that's been around forever to describe, like I said, academia. So academia is usually categorized when you see it in the wild is either as light or dark. It's kind of the same aesthetic, just light tends to be more sort of positive and happy versions of academia. General enjoyment, enlightenment. Whereas the dark side kind of concentrates more on sort of more darker aspects, the struggling artists, the existential crisis of that you kind of that you find in academia. So the actual aesthetic is the same. It's just kind of how it's presented, and I will say maybe with palette changes, with light academia favoring a slightly lighter palette and dark academia favoring a slightly darker palette. So what does this aesthetic look like? So basically it's anything to do with school or learning or, like I said, the whole sort of realm of academia, all the trappings of that. So we see, like in architecture, like universities like Oxford and Harvard. We see a lot of, in terms of clothing, either sort of that, like tweeds and plaids and turtlenecks, our school uniforms. Obviously, books. Books are huge, especially old-looking books in libraries. We see it tends to gravitate towards dark woods and dark furniture. And in general, to clarify, usually when we're talking academia, it usually sort of concentrates on a historic period that kind of goes from 1900 to 1960. Now, that's not like those are not hard dates, but it sort of romanticizes education in that period. So yeah, there's that word romanticization again, because a lot of time aesthetic is just a romanticization of something that's, real. And we've seen it with steampunk, which romanticizes Victorian, the sort of Victorian style combined with modern technology. Or we've seen a cottagecore where we're romanticizing this idea of living in the past, of living in the cottage, of living this more simple life. And in academia is a very much a romanticization of learning and and study, and of course books. Books are huge. So as an aesthetic, you see a lot of the people at desks, people working in books. There's a lot of focus on the classics, as they're called, which were sort of this core curriculum at universities, like during that period, even before that period. The idea of the classics goes way back, but the idea of studying like Greek and Roman, learning Latin and Greek as languages, studying the sort of core canon of philosophers like Plato and Socrates, and then in literature, things like Shakespeare. So academia does cover sort of a broad period in terms of like 1900, 1960. There's a whole slew of things that can cover in terms of period. So, but it tends to concentrate on the academic side of things. So how colleges were like, what schools were like. There are some variances though, and sometimes people, like I said, even though most of it seems to capture in the period, there's some people who look more at more modern type school settings. Or like I said, this is also very Eurocentric, as you may have noticed, Euro-Western centric. But there are some who look at things like Japanese schooling, like we see in anime and manga, like we see in anime and manga, is kind of fits the aesthetic too. So It's can be a very broad term that covers a lot of different things, but as long as we're kind of in that school realm, and I'm kind of concentrating on what the most common perceptions of it are too. So, um, likewise, even though it can concentrate on those classics, if you look at a more modern interpretation, you're going to start seeing a wider array of the humanities kind of expands, and it's like now, and we have things now like gender studies and African American studies and a more global approach to what constitutes the classics. And so that's kind of the aesthetic part of it. That's the look. The look is, I live in a library and I love it so much. Or I go to college and it's just this magical experience, which in real life maybe not so much, but as an aesthetic is very much tied to genre and the idea of school stories. Like I said, one of the influences you could consider would be like Japanese anime and manga have a lot of school stories, a lot of stories that focus on school. There's a whole thing with school uniforms over there and doing fantastical uniforms. Clamp famously has like its Clamp Academy, which is like this mega city school that has all these specialties and all the specialized equipment, and only the elitist of the elite students go there, the smartest, the best, and the brightest. But closer to the US, we have a whole kind of genre of movies like Dead Poet Society or School Ties or Kill Your Darlings, Theory of Everything, that are all these sort of movies that focus on things that happen in the sphere of academia and the sphere of college. They all kind of happen in that period, that 1900 to 1960 period. But even still, beyond that, there's things like there's a magical take on it with things like Harry Potter and The Magicians. The recent Netflix series, The Queen's Gambit, which this outfit is definitely inspired by. And I love like the aesthetic for that, even though it's not necessarily a school story. There means there's some school. It's centered on chess, which is feels very academia. Words are hard to pronounce. Which is actually a very fits with the aesthetic. Is you're someone who, like me, learns most of your vocabulary through reading and then finds you are horrible at pronunciation. Seems to be on brand for the aesthetic too. But in terms of genre, yeah, there's any kind of school story tends to, like, I have the feeling the aesthetic came out of people watching Dead Poet Society too many times. And has kind of expanded since, but that's kind of where the core of the aesthetic is. I can't, like, prove that that's where it came from necessarily, because it also sometimes feels like book nerds went, hey, I like this idea of cottagecore, but rather than running off to a cottage in the middle of nowhere, can I run off to a library? So we've talked about it as an aesthetic, we've talked about it as a genre, so let's get into lifestyle and subculture a little bit here. There is sort of like with cottagecore is kind of has moved into lifestyle, I think. Academia is kind of trying with all these people, like, concentrating on reading more, making their environments feel more like that, concentrating on learning and making and improving themselves in that sense. But because the problem is with the lifestyle and subculture, there is sort of a real academia. There are real schools. People do go to school. The thing is, our modern conception of college kind of looks more like this, with frat parties and wearing your pajamas to class. And this is a much more romanticized version. And if you're curious why that is, it's because in the 1960s we see this big loosening of dress codes, both all the way down. Like, even when you went to a public school, you dressed nicely. You wore nice shirts. It actually kind of starts in public schools with them kind of, loosening their things. Girls were expected to wear nice dresses. You're expected to dress nicely. And college campuses especially start in the 1960s, even just outright abolishing dress codes, people wearing jeans to class and t-shirts, and, it's the hippies. They're dressing that hippie style, that 60s bohemian style. They're, wearing their sandals to class. And since then, you've seen that sort of idea that you have to be professional while you're at college disappear. Not entirely, obviously. I'm not saying college kids are unprofessional, but the idea of going to class in a suit, just unless you're going to a job interview right after or something, doesn't seem to really be a thing anymore. We do still see, like, private schools in the U.S. have uniforms, and like overseas, a lot, like in places like England and Japan, Korea, there are places that still have uniforms for what we in the U.S. call public education. I know in Britain, public education actually is what we call private school. It gets really confusing. But just to say that school uniforms are still a thing in some places, but by and large, that part of it has disappeared. The stress in the studying has not, and the pressure to perform. Some colleges have gotten better recently of providing mental health services to their students to help relieve that and try to provide safe spaces for students to, de-stress and take breaks. But I don't know. I have been out of school for a fairly long time now, so I can't comment on what it's currently like, but college was stressful. Like, I'm glad I could wear pajamas to class, because, oh my god, I don't know if I'd get there otherwise. So in terms of lifestyle and subculture, there's like really people going to school and really doing this. So it seems that I don't know, as the aesthetic version of it, I think it's going to be something that kind of just doesn't necessarily move all the way into that sphere, where College Course kind of moved into this whole sort of sphere. Academia might exist there as slow living, but largely in terms of subculture, then I think it's mostly still just book nerds finding an aesthetic they like. Like, I'm not judging. I'm a huge book nerd. And if you guys, if you watch my my first lookbook video, you can see my bookshelves, and like, I have piles of books all over the place. You guys just don't get to see them. But so like I said, lifestyle subculture, this has not gone into that sphere so much, unless you want to talk about real life. People go to school, people study, people do these things. Otherwise, I mean, it's still fairly a new aesthetic. There are some dangers with it in terms of like romanticizing something that's kind of Eurocentric. Like I said, really the best interpretation of it sometimes includes a lot of these modern studies in humanities. Also, I mean, the sciences, like, admittedly, the sciences are not, with sort of that pristine lab look, is not as romantic as, the old-timey, labs with the people all dressed up and like all the fancy brass equipment that feels kind of steampunkish. So there's where we tie into steampunk here. And then there's also sort of, like I said, this romanticization of the past. While these school stories are very beautiful and inspirational, we gotta remember that there were real people who went to school who, had to do real exams and were under real pressure. But overall, it's a fun aesthetic. It is very much, like I said, book nerd, and pot calling kettle black, I guess. And just like a lot of the other aesthetics I've talked about, there's actually a lot of little sub-aesthetics. Academia seems to really lend itself to it. So if you're really into art, there's art academia, which, involves concentrating art and artists and museums and appreciating the arts. I don't know why I'm putting that in air quotes. As I mentioned, gray academia, which deals with sort of a certain amount of ableism in academia, and particularly when it comes to people who are neurodivergent, with things like autism and learning disabilities and ADHD, and the fact that they too can enjoy this aesthetic, and that traditionally they've been excluded from that world, but there's ways that they, when the right accommodations, they can participate too, and they can enjoy it, and how those accommodations fit into the aesthetic. So, that is academia. I hope this was an interesting conversation. And I hope I'd love to hear back from what you guys think about the aesthetic. Are you light? Are you dark? Do you not care? Because I hate to say I kind of fall in that category. Some days I am the like, oh, the joys of learning the books. I'm so happy. And then some days I'm like, life is meaningless, and all I can do is look at this book. So let me know what you guys think. Also, I'd like to kind of say hey to everyone who's watching, because as of recording this, I have 49 subscribers, which I know in YouTube terms is nothing, but to me it is everything. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you for the subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, you could get me to 50. You could be the 50th subscriber, and you could make my day just a little more joyful. And if you like what I'm doing here, please subscribe, of course. I'm also getting a lot more views on these videos, so I'd like, if you just stop by, hi. Please check out my other videos. I have lots to do with aesthetic, a little bit to do with witchcraft, a little bit to do with lifestyle and home. I do stuff here. And I hope you guys enjoy it. So please check them out, and if you like them, please also subscribe. You can just leave comments to say hi, because I'd love to talk with you guys. Also, if you don't want to talk here, I have other social media. I have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and I can link them below. I'd love to connect with you guys there. I do a lot of extra stuff on my Instagram, and you can kind of see a little bit more of my daily life, I guess. I also have a proto Patreon. If you want to check that out, I'd like to build this and grow this channel and make it sort of self-sufficient. So the first goals are obviously to get better equipment. I do this on my phone right now, so you can go over there. I'm hoping if I get Patreons, I can start creating content for you guys over there too. Maybe some stuff that doesn't quite fit the theme of this channel, or some behind the scenes stuff. I do have a behind the scenes video in the works. So you can click over there also. Otherwise, just thank you for viewing. Thank you for stopping by. And I hope you guys have an enchanted day. Bye!